Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruthie Louis-Jean, at-large City Councilor, and I'm the Boston City Council President and Chair of the City Council's Committee of the Whole. Today is December 6, 2024. This hearing is being recorded. It is also being live-streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, FiOS Channel 964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.whole@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. Individuals will be called on in the order in which they signed up and will have 2 minutes to testify. If you are interested in testifying in person, please add your name to the sign-up sheet near the entrance of the chamber. If you are looking to testify virtually, please email our Central Staff Liaison, Michelle Goldberg, at michelle.a.goldberg@boston.gov for the link, and your name will be added to the list. Today's hearing is on 2 dockets. Docket number 1670, order for a hearing regarding voter accessibility and election preparedness. And on docket number 1507, 3 dockets, message and order requesting and recommending that the city hold in-person early voting for both the September 9th, 2025 preliminary municipal election, presuming this body acts favorably on my separate submission related to the date of the preliminary, and the November 4th, 2025 municipal election. I make this request in accordance with the provisions of GL C54, Section 25B, C1, upon the request of the registrars of the City of Boston. That statute provides a local option to allow for in-person early voting for any preliminary or municipal election. And docket number 1508, message and order at the recommendation of the Chair of the Board of Election and Commissioners, I hereby transmit for the approval of your honorable body an order fixing the date of the 2025 preliminary municipal election as September 9th, 2025. Docket number 1670 was sponsored by myself, Councilor Enrique Pepin, and Councilor Aaron Murphy, and referred to the committee on November 6, 2024. Docket number 1507 and 1508 were sponsored by the administration and referred to the committee on October 9, 2024. Today, I am joined by my colleagues in order of arrival, Councilor Aaron Murphy, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Fitzgerald, Councilor Pepin, Councilor Durkin, and Councilor Braden. I'm not sure that was the right order? Okay. I also have an absence letter from Councilor Coletta Zapata. I will read the absence letter into the record. Dear Council President Louis-Jean and Council colleagues, I regret to inform you that I will be absent from today's Boston City Council hearing on dockets number 1670, 1507, 1508, a hearing regarding voter accessibility and election preparedness, including setting the date for the 2025 preliminary municipal election and authorization of early voting for the 2025 preliminary and general municipal elections. Elections are fundamental to local democracy, providing citizens the opportunity to shape the communities in which they live. They determine key local officials and municipal leaders who have a direct impact on local policies, budgets, and services. Any delays or gaps in election services must be promptly and properly addressed. We must also do our due diligence to secure proper funding to the Elections Department so that hardworking public servants in that office are able to execute this vital citywide operation. A member of my staff will be listening in, and I will review the recording. Kindly read this letter into the record. Sincerely, Gabriela Coletta Zapata, Boston City Councilor, District 1. I would like to introduce, well, before I do that, I first want to offer some opening remarks on this docket. I want to thank all of you for being here today as we examine the challenges faced during our recent election here in the city of Boston. This hearing is an opportunity to understand what happened, identify areas for improvement, and ensure that our electoral process serves all voters effectively. It's clear that the ballot shortages in several neighborhoods, including Hyde Park, Rosendale, Jamaica Plain, West Roxbury, Dorchester, and the South End, created difficulties for voters and election workers alike. While additional ballots were ultimately delivered, the delays caused frustration and raised important questions about how we can better prepare for high turnout elections in the future. We recognize hard work and dedication of the Boston Elections Department. We've relied on you for so much, Commissioner, and for so much, Sabino. We thank you for all of your incredible work. And as someone who worked as a lawyer on a number of campaigns, I know that that elections can be difficult to administer, but it's important that we hold the public trust as paramount and that we make sure that our elections operate under complex and demanding conditions to support a fair and accessible voting process. Our goal today is not to place blame, but to learn more about what happened and how we can address these challenges together as a city. I sincerely appreciate the Elections Department's willingness to engage in this process. Together, we aim to strengthen trust in our democratic systems and ensure every voter has an opportunity to participate without barriers. However, first we will address dockets 1507 and 1508, setting the date for early voting. Early voting gives people more flexibility to cast their ballots, especially those who may face challenges voting on election day due to work, family obligations, or other commitments. Setting these dates require careful planning. It involves balancing the need to provide enough time for voters with the resources required to support early voting locations, including staffing, ballots, and technology. It also means considering how to reach and inform all communities about early voting opportunities to encourage participation. So I thank everyone for being here. I am now going to turn it over to my co-sponsors for opening remarks, and I will also turn it over to my other colleagues for opening remarks if they can keep it brief so that we can then move on to questions. So I will now turn the floor over to Councillor Pepin, but I would first like to introduce who we have here before us. Thank you for being with us here, Election Commissioner Neda Tavares, and also Sabino Pamanti, Head Assistant Registrar of Votes. We will first hear from my colleagues, and then I will turn it over to you as a panel for any opening remarks. The chair turns it over to Councillor Pepin. Councillor Pepin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for this important discussion. Election days are always important, and for me specifically, I was on the ground on election day this year in Hyde Park, specifically at 2 polling locations where I was able to see firsthand how the shortage of ballots impacted the residents waiting in line. And I think that having this hearing here is very important just to get answers and clarity as to why it happened. But I'm also looking forward to being part of the solution and how we can make sure that this doesn't happen in the future, while also elevating the hard workers that do work at the elections department, because I know it's no easy task, especially for an election that brought out so many voters in a historical election. Shout out to all the volunteers that really hold it down at each polling location, and for those that sign up to work the day of. But I'm really thankful that I get to be here in front of you and be able to hear from you as to what happened, what solutions you think you have in mind, and how we can make sure this doesn't happen again in the city of Boston. So thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, we'll hear from the other original co-sponsor, Councillor Murphy. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. This obviously is an important hearing today. On Tuesday, November 5th, Boston experienced a significant voter turnout, yet there were multiple reports of ballots running out at several precincts across the city, leading to delays. My phone started ringing early, and I did reach out. I know, Sabino, you picked right up, and we did have a conversation early about a concern that was happening in Hyde Park early in the morning. These shortages led to long wait times for voters, with some individuals unable to wait for ballots to be replenished and ultimately leaving without casting their votes, potentially disenfranchising eligible voters. The Boston Police Department and election officials did work diligently to address the issue by delivering additional ballots to precincts across the city. Many of us, I was out on the ground, but many people saw on the TV, we saw police officers in cars driving out of City Hall and trying to get to polling locations, making sure people didn't leave their spot in line. It's the responsibility of the City of Boston to ensure that all eligible voters have equal access to the ballot, free from unnecessary barriers or delays, and that any situation which impedes this right must thoroughly be investigated and addressed to make sure it doesn't happen again. Voters should never have to wait inordinate amounts of time to exercise their right to vote. I don't think it's bad to wait in line if there's just a lot of people who turn out. I was happy to see that there was high voter turnout, but in the cases that I'm referring to here, they were waiting because there were no ballots. So it wasn't just a line that people kept showing up. It's that they had to wait for ballots to show up to even cast their vote. And so it's unacceptable, and we must figure out how to go forward. So what I'm hoping happens today in this hearing is that we find out the reasons for the shortage of the ballots in multiple precincts and any deficiencies in preparation or forecasting the number of ballots needed in the future, the response time and effectiveness of the measures taken by the election department and any other agency, like I referenced that the Boston Police Department did step in to deliver additional ballots to precincts to reduce wait times, the impact these delays may have had on any voter turnout, particularly among vulnerable or historically underrepresented communities, and anything resulting in disenfranchisement. Recommendations for improvements in planning, voter outreach, and election administration to assure all voters have timely access to the ballot in future elections, and to review how future elections can be better prepared to handle this high voter turnout. And also how we, myself, the council, how we as a body can help support your department, making sure that this doesn't happen again. So I look forward to this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Councilor Flynn. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to be clear that these ballot shortage, reports of unanswered calls, and a host of other issues is unacceptable. The shortages in ballots were reported across multiple precincts in the city of Boston, including West Roxbury, Hyde Park, Rosendale, Dorchester, Jamaica Plain, the South End. Residents were forced to wait in line or were asked to return at a later time to vote. My research has said that there is 14 precincts that did not have the right ballots. At the Cathedral High School in the South End, which I proudly share with my colleague, John Fitzgerald, they ran out of English-only ballots, although English was also included on the Chinese ballots. Many poll workers also reported that when they called the election department to notify them of the ballot shortages, they were unable to reach the department. The Mass Secretary of State also mentioned that he tried to contact the City of Boston Election Department. His calls went unanswered. He had to physically send someone from his office to City Hall. It's deeply concerning that the attempts by election workers that were at these precincts to reach the election department regarding the ballot shortages and other issues of concern were unsuccessful. Beyond running out of ballots, there was also poor lighting at the Cathedral High School location, which I visited with my wife, Kristen, around 5 o'clock on Election Day to bring the poll workers and volunteers pizza and to thank them. And when I got there, it was troubling. I saw elderly people having to use their cell phones to put on their flashlight so that they could read the ballot, especially the 5 questions. It was very confusing. It was very difficult for persons with disabilities and our seniors. These ballot shortages and other issues demonstrate the election department was not prepared. It was an important presidential election, and we failed to perform these basic functions. We, meaning all of us, including the City Council. The city's initial investigation found out that there was a formula miscalculation. I think it's more than that. I would also like to find out more answers today on how this happened, why it happened. We also know what happened in 2004 when we elected the first African-American governor in the state, Deval Patrick, and many of the precincts across the city, especially in communities of color, also ran out of ballots. We simply cannot afford these mistakes during an important presidential election year or any election going forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilor Fitzgerald. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, the administration, for coming here to answer some of our questions today. Really focused on the technical aspect and how we can correct those procedurally to make sure it doesn't happen again, but otherwise, looking forward to your answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor. The chair recognizes Councilor Durkin, but also want to note for the record that we've been joined by Councilor Weber. Councilor Durkin, you have the floor for opening remarks.
Thank you so much. I know our elections department operates with a lot of integrity, and I know that the challenges faced on Election Day were not intentional, so I'm just curious, how I'm just here to listen, and I'm curious how this conversation goes. Appreciate both of your leadership, and excited to think about how not only we can make sure that our elections run smoothly, but how we can also encourage civic participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The chair recognizes Councillor Braden. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and good afternoon, Sabino and Commissioner. I'm here to learn. I know there were some challenges. I was getting calls in the afternoon. Everything seemed to be going smoothly in Alston, Brighton, and District 9, but I was getting calls from a friend who was working in a polling place in JP, and she was having difficulty. They knew that they were running low in ballots at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they started to call to order more ballots, and I think there was some breakdown in communication with regard to phone calls being answered, etc. And I think there's definitely, this is why we're here this afternoon, to just learn what went wrong and how we might make sure that those shortcomings don't happen the next time. I'm also delighted to say that the Jackson Man Community Centre was able to be held open, available for voting place for 5 precincts in Alston, Brighton this election cycle, and we hope it will continue to be available in the future as an election place. So look forward to the conversation, and I always thank you for your professionalism and you've always been so incredible integrity and commitment to fair elections in Boston. So we're here to do a little post-mortem, but thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Councillor Braden, and apologies. I'm still not used to. Maybe I'll ask my colleagues on help on using this timer. The chair recognizes Councillor Weber. Councillor Weber, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair and Madam President. I think the right to vote is incredibly important, and the information we got on election night was with polling places running out of ballots and having difficulty reaching the elections department. It's concerning, and I'd just like to thank the administration for being here to answer our important questions on this topic and figure out how to solve these issues going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Weber, and thank you to all of my colleagues. I'll now turn it over to the Assistant Registrar, Head Assistant Registrar, and the Commissioner for any opening remarks that you may have. Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Council President, Louis-Jean, and committee members. Excuse me, I'm a little under the weather. Thank you for holding this hearing today on docket numbers 1508, 1507, and 1670. I will start with the first two. As you are aware, according to the city charter, the preliminary municipal election would fall on Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025, and the municipal election would take place 6 weeks after, on Tuesday, November 4th, 2025. In 2022, legislation was passed to make vote by mail a permanent measure in the state, and to also provide municipalities with the option to provide in-person early voting in municipal elections. In order to continue and build upon all of the work that has been done to increase voter access, we would like to keep both of these options available to voters for the fall elections. However, in doing so, there are some administrative processes that must be taken into account when preparing for the upcoming election. Ballot preparation for the November election cannot begin until after the certification of election results, which would fall on September 30th with the current election date, which would need to be followed by a ballot position drawing before we can even start preparing the ballots. So with rush delivery, we estimate receiving printed ballots during the week of October 13th, which is only 3 weeks before the November 4th election. Once ballots are received, we would still need time to prepare the ballot kits to be mailed to voters, and also to prepare all of the other functions relative to in-person early voting. Moving the date of the preliminary election will not only ensure our department has a sufficient amount of time to prepare between elections, but it will also ensure that voters have the optimum opportunity to receive and return vote by mail ballots.
Okay.
So,
Commissioner.
with respect to the
Thank you.
ballot.
Commissioner, they can't really hear you, so I know that if you could center yourself a little bit more in the mic and then speak more directly. And, you know, I have a cold. Thank you, Counselor. And I see you in the audience. There are folks who couldn't hear, so just lean a bit. And I know you have a cold, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'd also like to add that both Sabino and I are deeply committed to the effective administration of elections and ensuring that all Boston voters have an opportunity to participate and cast their ballot in as many convenient, accessible ways possible. We take the ballot issues that took place on November 5th incredibly seriously and have been engaged in intensive efforts to understand what happened and to ensure that our systems will be improved, ensuring it does not happen again. Our goal for every election is for preparation to be timely, detailed, and coordinated to provide an effective, efficient, and inclusive election experience for every voter in the city. Many parts of that system worked as intended on November 5th. However, there were failures that resulted in ballot shortages in some precincts, caused concerns about ballot shortages in others, as well as communication challenges throughout the day. The challenges faced on Election Day appeared to originate with a mistake in calculating the number of ballots to be sent to the polls. This error, compounded by issues such as machine breakdowns, extended calls with poll workers to resolve machine issues as well as voter issues, and the amount of time and staff we needed to identify, pack, and send additional ballots to precincts made it difficult for poll workers to get through to the department and heightened frustrations and concerns. We are committed to ensuring these problems are rectified in the future. We are currently fully cooperating and providing the Secretary of State with facts and information for its investigation into the issues on November 5th. We will engage fully and cooperate with an independent firm that the administration is bringing in to conduct an investigation into the issues on November 5th. Additionally, we will engage with a third-party expert consultant to evaluate the department's structure, procedures, and resources in early 2025, and will strive to implement recommendations to address what is now the task of running 3 elections with a department that was previously designed to run only in-person Election Day voting. And we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Sabino, if you'd like to.
I have nothing else to add.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and just so that my colleagues are aware, the first set of questions we're going to ask are again on the just setting the election day. Hopefully that's the one that's going to be more straightforward. Maybe there are not that many questions. I have questions, some folks have questions, and also I know that we have some public testimony in person and online on those dockets, so we're going to take those first. I'm going to set a timer for myself of 6 minutes, and then we'll. Councilor Pepin, my co-sponsor, is going to help me set the timer for 6 minutes. I just did something different. It's different when you're up there. There's no timer. Or down here, there's a timer. I'll also set it on my phone, so. You got it? Great. Okay. Thank you, and thank you for your efforts in making sure that there's enough time for early vote, that we are honoring early vote. I don't have any questions on the movement of the date itself. I understand why. On the setting of the preliminary on September 9th, it's clear to me why we would need to move it to that day. I just have a question about whether the elections department, and thinking about what makes the most sense for prioritizing locations for early voting, whether the elections department prioritizes locations like East Boston High School and in East Boston and the Frederick School in Dorchester, which have multiple precincts. Do we think about those as early voting sites? Because they're not currently early voting sites, but thinking about whether we would want them to be.
Early voting sites are selected based on the availability of the actual location. We do strive to select locations like the ones that you did mention, which have large open gymnasiums that can be utilized. So yes, we are willing to consider those options, but again, it just depends on the availability of the facility.
Thank you. And what's the number of early voting sites that we're setting for next year for the preliminary election?
We are aiming to have one in every single neighborhood, at least during the weekends. During the last municipal election, I believe we had 10 sites on Saturday and Sunday. City Hall was available every single day, and then we had 3 sites on Tuesday and Thursday. So we do
When you say last election, do you mean this presidential election?
During
Right,
the
'cause it's
last
different. Municipal election, okay.
Yes,
Yep,
where
yep.
we're allowed to have 1 week of in-person early voting.
Yep.
That was the plan. We had 10 neighborhood locations on Saturday and Sunday. Every day here at City Hall, and then Tuesday and Thursday, we had 3 neighborhood sites going on those 2 days. So we hope to remain consistent and provide a similar schedule to what we did during the last municipal election.
Okay. Does your department analyze turnout data to determine whether locations with multiple precincts experience higher voter traffic? And if so, how is this data used to inform early voting sites?
So in-person early voting is available to every voter. It's not precinct-based, such as it is on election day. So I think precincts with multiple location will have a higher turnout than standalone precincts. So I don't think you can really compare the two, because a voter on election day has to go to their specific precinct. So if you have 3 precincts that voters have to go to on election day, it's kind of different than opening up a location where any voter can go to based on convenience as opposed to where they're assigned to.
Okay, thank you. Does the elections department currently collect data that can maybe become part of a report? Like, could there be a post-election report that analyzes early voting and mail-in voting to see how we can improve early voting and where we should be opening additional early voting sites? I ask because there's still so much communication that needs to happen during early voting, getting calls from residents who believe that they can early vote at their polling location, and we have to sort of do the work of education. So wondering if we could do a deeper dive, like a postmortem after an election, to really analyze and to have something tangible that shows what we should be doing with respect to early voting.
I definitely think so. However, we still want to strive to make sure that early voting is available in every single neighborhood, because when you look at the data, you're going to see that some neighborhoods are probably busier than others, and we want to make sure that we're always covering every single neighborhood and providing the same opportunity across every single neighborhood in the city.
Okay. And then my last question on this petition is, I think we talked about this, but why don't we specify specifically the number of early voting locations I believe we had in previous years?
I think it's just a matter of we haven't secured the locations as of yet.
Okay.
Because there's still a lot of work to actually reach out to the facilities and select the locations.
Okay.
But our goal is to at least have locations in every single neighborhood across the city. We can always explore adding more, but again, that would come with additional resources needed to support additional sites.
Okay, thank you. And I know that there's some challenges to have schools to be early voting sites, but we know that there are high turnout precincts, again, like I said, at East Boston High, where could that be an early voting site where we have, especially if we look at this past election, the presidential election, not the same as your municipal election, but there was such high turnout in some of these precincts. And that to me is high turnout precincts, early voting sites. So I am going to, I'm doing good on time. I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to allow my colleagues to ask any questions. So I will turn it over to Councilor Penn. If you have any questions, now is the time.
Thank you, Madam President. For me, it's more about the process of early voting. I just want to know, can you explain more for the audience, what's the difference in terms of protocol when the voter goes in to vote at an early voting location? Obviously, it is in the same location that they might go into. On election day, so what's the difference? What do you guys require an ID? How are the voting location employees looking them up?
So the process is different during early voting than it is on election day. During early voting, we use electronic poll pads for check-in versus an actual paper check-in on election day. During early voting, these poll pads have the capability of scanning IDs. However, identifications are not required. We do require that every single location has posted signs informing voters that although it speeds up the process, having your identification may speed up the process because it makes the check-in faster, it's not required. So if someone goes into an early voting location and they don't have an ID, the poll workers would simply do a manual check-in of that voter. Again, compared to a paper-based check-in process on election day. The other difference is that, again, on election day, you are confined to going to your specific precinct. So you have to be registered in the precinct that you live in versus you can go to any location that's convenient for you during the early voting period.
Gotcha. And are they staffed at the same level as on election day? I'm just thinking about someone that may need language access services.
No, they are not staffed the same. On election day, we strive to staff at least 6 voters per precinct and covering any language for that specific neighborhood. Early voting, we could have up to 20 people because, again, it's just a higher turnout based on the fact that anyone can go to any single location, and we do strive to staff a number of languages at all of the early voting locations.
Okay. And as the chair of technology innovation, I always think, are you considering or foresee the city of Boston using the technology used for early voting in regular voting days in future elections?
That's something that's under consideration.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you, Councilor Pepin. Councilor Murphy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So on early voting, September 9th, sounds like a great day. Could we talk about why this past primary was September 3rd, the day after the Labor Day weekend, and not September 10th, why that was chosen back then? And if going forward, we could always make sure, because you must get those conversations or people calling, because I heard a lot of people talking about, this election's going to be a low turnout, but it's also the day after Labor Day. People are just coming back, from summer mode, maybe not summer vacations, but settling in and getting their kids ready to go back to school, and most people don't have elections on their mind. So why did we choose the 3rd?
We don't set the calendar for state elections. The state does.
There you go. Thank you. So we can't control when they do, but we could maybe put that through as like a home rule petition going forward, because obviously voter turnout is important. What the numbers, so when you go in person to vote at one of the early voting in-person locations, those ballots are returned to the election department and then sent back out on election day to the precincts, is that true?
That is correct. So ballots cannot be counted until, or results cannot be released until election day. So if
But
you,
ballots can be counted.
only during a certain period that's set in statute and regulation.
Well, I know they can't be released prior totally, but
Yep.
the election department, did you open and tally the early in-person votes?
For 110 precincts, yes, we did. We did. There's a process for advanced processing and removal, and for the past election, we were able to advance process ballots for about 110 precincts. The cutoff was 2 p.m. on election day, so any ballots that arrived by 2 p.m. on election day had to be sent to the precincts to be counted. So there is a cutoff. So any precincts that weren't, I'm sorry, I'm getting winded here. Any precincts that weren't processed centrally, in addition to ballots that arrived after a certain time frame, were sent to the polls to be counted.
So in the afternoon, they were here until 2, and if you didn't get to them, then you sent them out?
They go out with all of the other ballots to be processed, but anything that arrives by 2 p.m. here at City Hall does get sent to the polling location to be counted.
Okay. And mail-in ballots. I have another question about that, but with the mail-in ballots, were those counted prior?
Same process for both. So in-person early voting and mail-in ballots are treated the same way. So for 110 precincts, we processed the vote by mail ballots as well as the early voted ballots that we had in our possession.
And do we do that every election, or was this the first time we chose to open and count them prior to the election day?
I believe this was the third time we had advanced processing and removal. Our first time was actually during the 2020 election when we used this facility here. So thank you all for making the space available to us. So during the 2020 election, we did have advanced processing here in the Ionella chamber. And then I believe we did it again in 2022.
So do you have the numbers of turnout at the in-person early voting locations?
Yes, we do have those numbers. We did not bring them with us.
Could
here
you
today,
share
but we
that?
do
Because I
have-
think that's important, just especially looking forward to trying to pick other locations or expanding it. That would be helpful to
I
know,
may
like
have
how
those
many people actually show up, like on Saturday at the Murphy School to vote, or wherever the other locations are.
Okay, I have overall turnout, but we can definitely provide
The
a
breakdown would be helpful, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I think I asked this question at the last hearing. You were here in front of us a couple months ago, but if you request an early voting mail-in ballot, because I think I said to you, Sabina, this happened to me, but then I requested the ballot, I didn't use it, and I went to vote in person at Florian Hall when it was, I think, the Tuesday night or the Thursday night, they were having early, in-person voting, and they said, well, you have the EV next to your name, you can't vote. And I thought, well, I'm pretty sure I can. I left. But then when I went back on election day, I didn't have time to wait, but on election morning, when I went to my polling location, there was also confusion about whether or not I had already voted or not, because I was, flagged as someone who requested a mail-in ballot, but I never used it. So can you just talk through that process and how we can make sure our poll workers understand?
We conduct over 60 trainings for every single election. We will continue to reiterate the processes and procedures for poll workers. So that
They do a wonderful job, so I'm not blaming them, but just wondering if it can be clear for myself also and for everyone understanding that.
Yep.
Just because you requested a mail-in ballot doesn't mean you have to use it, and you still can vote.
That is correct. So just because you can request a ballot, and if you have not returned that ballot, you can vote at an early voting location or in person.
And if the poll workers at the location don't understand that, or kind of not sure and don't want to allow you, what should a voter do?
They need to put a call into our department.
Okay, so they should be calling the election department directly, and then you could assist and talk. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Sabino. I remember the last hearing we had, you mentioned there were no challenges at all for the preliminary election. Were there any challenges during the preliminary election as it related to early voting?
Not that I'm aware, no.
Sabino?
No.
Were there any challenges as it related to the general election on early voting?
No.
No.
I was on Halloween night, I was out in front of the South Boston Public Library, and many people, that's a week before the election, many people were going by there to drop off their ballot, but it was locked. It was shut down, and saying that they could not drop off their ballot because, for various reasons, I believe that was a Wednesday or a Thursday, and then they were going home to their house outside of Massachusetts, and they had this ballot that they couldn't bring into City Hall. Their plan was to bring it to the South Boston Library, and they couldn't do that. It was shut, it was closed. Was the South Boston Public Library the only one shut at that time?
No, so it has been a practice since the Dropbox fire we experienced back in 2020, that we do lock the ballot drop boxes on Halloween nights. We did put out communication via social media, I believe a press release to inform voters, and there were posted signs as well on those ballot drop boxes informing voters that they would be locked and then they would be reopened the following morning.
I don't think that happened. I don't think those locations opened up the following morning. Do you have a record of them actually being physically opened up, Sabino?
I may in the office, but I believe the sign indicated that all boxes should be open by 1 or 2 p.m.
Yeah, that wasn't the case. Was that the only time these boxes were locked during the election, during the Halloween period?
Yes.
Did you get any complaints at all about that?
No.
Not from one person?
No.
Okay, I received a lot. I received a lot. Residents would come to the public library, maybe it was just South Boston, but I don't know if other areas, but they'd come to the public library to drop off their ballot, and it was locked, they couldn't do it. And I believe the one out in front of City Hall was locked for a period of time too, right?
Just Halloween.
Just Halloween? For the preliminary, what was the difference between the preliminary and the general election as it relates to early voting issues? If there was no issues, I understand that.
I don't think there was any
There was-
issues.
Okay. Who was your point of contact at the mayor's office for early voting for the preliminary?
Point of contact, I'm not sure I understand.
Like, if there was an issue, who would you contact working with at the mayor's office? For the-
Councilor Flynn, is this with respect to the next docket?
No,
or
this is this one,
On
on
early voting? Okay, all right. Just wanted to clarify. It's with respect specifically to early voting.
Madam Chair, can I ask my questions?
You may.
Okay. So early voting, who was your point of contact for the preliminary election at the mayor's office?
I would imagine that would depend on what the issue is. I don't know that I would have necessarily called someone at the mayor's office, depending on what the issue may have been, and where we experienced no issue during the early voting period.
So you had no contact with the mayor's office? On early voting issues?
I had no contact with the mayor's office regarding early voting issues.
What about for the general election?
But I will intervene because this is just about setting the date for the 2 dockets.
Yeah, but Madam
Setting-
Chair, you asked similar questions as well.
They were all early voting with
Yeah,
respect to next year.
but these are challenges relating to early voting, and what are the challenges that happened during the preliminary and the general election. I'm just trying to get some general information, Madam Chair. It's nothing personal. I'm trying to do my due diligence so I can.
I understand. Commissioner, if you have a response to his question.
I don't.
Okay. You have additional time. Your mic is on. You have additional time.
Am I allowed to ask questions? Madam Chair?
You may.
Okay. Can I ask the questions without being
Pursuant to the
interrupted?
dockets, you may.
Is that okay?
Yes, pursuant to the the 2
So you want me to focus on the,
2 dockets, and then
that's
the
what,
questions.
Madam Chair, that's what I was doing.
Okay, proceed.
And-
Proceed, Counselor.
Madam Chair, you keep interrupting.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Counselor Fitzgerald. Counselor Fitzgerald, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to do the early voting and setting the date, right, which is that's what,
Yep.
the one we're on, right?
Yeah,
This-
we're on the docket that's about setting the date for
Yeah.
next year's election.
Right.
To September, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't start the timer.
That's all right. I haven't started my question, so it's
So,
going to tell.
yeah, I won't start it yet.
No, I'm not worried. I'm
So
not
it's on
worried.
setting the date for the preliminary election, which
Yep.
is September 9th, 2025.
Yep.
And it's on setting the early voting locations for next
Yeah.
year's election.
So pursuant to the setting of the date, this seems to be something that has to happen relatively often, that you have to come back down and change the date prior. What would your recommendations be to eliminate the need to come back to us this often, and what would that recommendation say or look like, or what does that verbiage look like?
A charter change? An
Okay, so
amendment of the
that,
charter.
I'm at, right?
Yes.
This is still new to me, so that's what it would take for us to
Correct.
charter. And so the charter change would request, what would the request for the change be? Like, where we say to make it a certain Tuesday after X amount of days, 8 weeks before this prior, could you explain the language to me at all, is what it might say?
I think that's what it would be. It would be kind of changing the number of weeks prior to the general election that it would be set.
Yep.
Yeah, I think right now it's set at 6 weeks before is the prelim, so changing it 2 weeks prior to that will be 8 weeks before.
And the 8 weeks before, that doesn't put us in any sort of, what's the earliest holiday in September, if we're looking at the preliminary there?
Labor Day.
Labor Day. And would that date, I think it says the 9th on this, right? If it was September 9th, 2025, where does that fall in relation to Labor Day of next year?
The week after.
It's the week after, so it wouldn't be the day. All right, that's good. Okay, I didn't receive anything about the early voting. There were no complaints as much as in my district, I think, about what that was. So I don't have a lot of questions on that one, but just was wondering what your all recommendation would be to sort of head this problem off for future, so we don't have to keep coming back to request these changes. And do you think that the 6 weeks to 8 weeks gives you the amount of time you need to implement in-person early voting and mail-in voting? 2 weeks provides you the difference of the preparation needed?
I think
Yes.
so, yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have for questions.
Thank you, Councilor Fitzgerald, and thank you for that question, because one of the reasons why I wanted to have this hearing, last term, this docket on the same issue was suspended and passed, but I just did want to give a forum for my colleagues, and I have questions to ask these questions because we have to do this often, and so are there ways that we can think about how not to make it so? Okay, the chair recognizes Councilor Durkin. Councilor Durkin, you have the floor in 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, President, whatever is is the top. I really don't have any questions regarding these two dockets, except for that I wanted to state my support for same-day voter registration. Given the date of this election, given the date of every preliminary election that we set, many constituents of my district who are students move, and they are disenfranchised because of and I think the state legislature had basically done every step except for making same-day voter registration legal. And so as it relates to this, just wanted to ask sort of any challenges, given that you guys have heard of people being disenfranchised, given that our early date is often, or our preliminary date is often after, most people move on September 1, so they don't have time to register to vote in time for the election. Do you guys get a lot of feedback on that?
Not much.
Yeah, no, not a lot of feedback on that.
I think in general, I've heard from a lot of constituents. I actually got the opportunity to speak at BU's first year student orientation as one of the first things I did as a city councilor. And I heard from a lot of people that they didn't feel comfortable moving their voting in Massachusetts and in Boston because they felt like voting by mail in their home state was easier, safer, and because they moved dorms during the year, that they were afraid they would be disenfranchised for the next year, so they just decided that they were going to vote in their home state. I thought that was a shame. So just wanted to share my support for that. I think given that every year we're forced to set dates within a calendar that disenfranchises a ton of people is a little bit unconscionable, and I think at the state level and here we should be doing everything we can to make sure that every resident of Boston has the same ability to vote on Election Day. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin, and thank you for saving us on some time. Okay, well, not. Okay, start. Go, you may.
No, I just wanted to say I really apologize. I wanted to be able to stay, but I have a pre-existing community meeting in Mission Hill, so just wanted to say I will be watching the tape. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin. The chair recognizes Councilor Braden. Councilor Braden, you now have the floor.
Thank you. So what docket are we talking to, or can we talk?
So it's dockets number, the last two dockets. It's docket number 1507 and 1508 about setting the date of the preliminary election next year to September 9th, and about early voting sites for the election next year.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, the early voting sites, I think we have the Jackson Man and the Hone in the library that worked out. I'd love to know how the Jackson Man worked out, because it was open streets, and I don't know if you saw a dip or was there an increase. I know folks were taking advantage. We're sort of sending people over there. Sabino, do you have any insights from? I remember we talked about it beforehand to say, is that going to make it more difficult for people to vote at Jackson Man?
We didn't experience any complaints in regards to open streets, but we did make it available to anybody that had a vote, that had an opportunity to vote, to be able to go in there, whether they were, had any disability, they would let vehicles go in there, so we had complete communication with everybody that was in charge of open streets.
That's good, yeah. And I do appreciate, this was the first year that I really paid attention to the idea of locking the boxes on Halloween, and we were able to let people know that the boxes were not going to be available from Halloween through November 1st to I think that was a prudent measure to try and stop vandalism, as we saw that happening in other places. The other question in terms of early voting, I know in our district we have a significant Jewish community, and I know this year the high holidays were later, so it didn't clash with interrupt. Does it ever have it? I know I look back, 2023, the preliminary election was on the 12th and Rosh Hashanah was the 15th, so that didn't really knock it off. But does it ever interfere that you have to move the date because of high holidays?
Yeah, prior to vote by mail and early voting, we did have some situations where the council had to move election dates because of the Jewish holidays. That's correct.
Yeah, so I think that vote by mail and early voting has made it a lot more flexible for people who have religious or business commitments or whatever, family commitments. It makes it easier. I think that's really all. I had a question about earlier, and it's more about the issue about running out of ballots. And I don't know if it's appropriate to ask this question right now, but the formula miscalculation, like what's the formula? Like how do you work that out? Like I know maybe this year there was an anticipation of a high level of early voting and vote by mail. And I think in a bumper year, like a big election, like a presidential, is sometimes hard to predict just how big the turnout is going to be. Can you give me some insight into how that formula works?
Sure. I just wanted to make sure that it was in line with.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, so what we anticipated was 80% turnout, and unfortunately, some of our formulas that we tried to put together for the 80% turnout didn't work to our liking. Therefore, most precincts were okay, but there were some that experienced shortages, and we tried to react as quickly as we could.
Yeah. Thank you. And then the issue with the phones not being answered, that was because you had some voting machine issues, that you were on the phones were busy dealing with poll workers' questions.
Councillor Braden,
sorry.
I think this is more for the second docket.
All right, very good.
If we could keep it for the next round of questions.
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Braden.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
appreciate that. Thank you. The chair recognizes, let me stop, reset. Okay, the chair recognizes Councillor Weber. You have the floor.
Yeah, I think I'll be quick. For early voting, people ask me a lot anyway, how much we spend, how much it costs to staff the early voting polling places. Do you have that information?
We can follow up with that information,
Okay.
as well as the breakdown of in-person early voting numbers.
Okay. Thank you. And I guess maybe this was addressed. Is it just for early voting, we're anticipating the same number of locations, more in the next one, less?
It would be the same number of locations as the previous municipal election, which was 10 neighborhood sites on Saturday and Sunday, 3 neighborhood locations on Tuesday and Thursday, and then every day at City Hall from Monday to Friday.
Can I just add one thing? Excluding Labor Day. We will not be open on Labor Day for early voting.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Back to you.
All right, okay, thank you so much, Council Weber. I have one final question, and if any of my colleagues have any questions, I'm gonna give myself, oh, I did it again. Okay, well, it'll be quick. So in the docket, it states that 48 hours notice is, the Elections Department will publish notice of the early voting location dates and hours at least 48 weekday hours before the early voting period begins. We often get a lot of calls from residents asking where the early voting locations going to be, where are they going to be, where are they going, and we are, and Sabina, you know, because we end up emailing you and oftentimes with the residents trying to find out when those are. Is there any way that we could push that up and require the early voting locations be made public 7 days prior to the start of early vote?
So we strive to mail every single voter a list of the early voting locations at least 2 weeks, so that they have it at least 2 weeks. That is just what's required by statute, but we aim to send out our mailers 2 weeks before the early voting period begins.
Okay, so this is required by state statute.
Correct.
Could we do more? Could we require, like, could we put in here in hours at least 7 days, not even weekdays, but 7 days prior, before the early voting period begins?
Yeah, I think that is achievable.
It's achievable?
Yes.
And it's something that we could put into writing such that voters could expect that we would have it to them?
Yes.
And that we would be online 7 days prior to early voting beginning?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd love to make that change so that we can make sure that there's more voter information and accessibility. So thank you so much, Commissioner. Do any of my colleagues have any additional questions on dockets number 15, let me make sure I get the numbers right, on these two dockets that are before us before we move on to docket 1670? Okay, the chair recognizes Councilor Murphy. I'm going to start your time. Can you put a
Oh, I don't
timer on?
need the time. I'll be quick.
You'll be quick?
Yeah,
Okay,
you don't
the
need
chair
the time.
recognizes
Yeah.
Councilor Murphy.
So on that, how early are we sending out a mailer? And do we send a mailer of early locations for every election, primary and final and special?
Yes, and that's the 2-week period. So we aim to have our mailers out in time for voters to have it in their possession at least 2 weeks before the election.
So if we're mailing 2 weeks prior, wouldn't we know at
Two-
least?
Sorry, 2 weeks before the early voting period begins.
Right, which means that we know more than 2 weeks prior where the locations are. Couldn't we start uploading? Why wait 7 days before if 2 weeks before we're sending out a mailer? I know there was errors in the mailer that went out for the early voting for the primary that had the wrong dates, but we already know the locations. Like, how soon do we know the locations?
Well, they are published as soon as the board votes on the locations. If that's 2 weeks before the election, we're publishing it right then and there.
Right,
So
so
we're
the
not
board
waiting.
has to vote prior to 2 weeks if you have to make sure you get the mailer out in time, correct?
Correct, and we do publish it before the date that's stated in the document.
Yeah, so the 7 days prior is easy to achieve, knowing that we already have confirmed it and mailed it out 2 weeks prior. Okay, just making sure, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with, okay, Councilor Flynn, you have the floor in 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also reached out to the election department on early voting in a piece of mail that was mailed out to registered voters. It had the inaccurate dates on there. Can you give us a little bit of background information on what happened and why it happened?
There was a typo in the document, and I think we've put measures in place to ensure that that does not happen again.
The typo mentioned the wrong date, is that right, for early voting?
Yeah, it did. It listed a typo in the actual dates. It should have said Sunday, August, something else, and it said Sunday with the wrong date.
And who at the election department signed off on that?
See, I mean, it doesn't,
I did,
Did you read the document?
numerous times. I missed it.
Okay. How are we going to ensure that that doesn't happen again?
There's multiple levels of proofreading now set in place.
Is there anyone outside of the election department that also reviews it?
Yes.
Yes, we have put that in place, yes.
Who are those officials?
It can consist of members from DeWitt, from other departments who actually work on the actual document, to members of the administration.
Did the members of the administration review it this time before it went out?
Yes.
The one that was incorrect?
No, the one that was correct. The one.
No, I'm talking about the one that was incorrect.
No, they did not. So we've put things in place since to ensure that there are additional eyes on the flyers before they are mailed.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, do any of my other colleagues have questions on either of these two dockets? I see no lights on. Great. We'll move on to docket number 1507. I apologize. It's docket number 1670. I'm going to give my colleagues 6 minutes for this round. I'm going to start with myself. I'm going to make sure that. Okay. All right, so and I just want to confirm that you don't at this time have any opening statements, because I think your opening statement was encompassing both of them.
Yeah. No,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. So again, I just want to say that I thank you for your work. I know that election administration is really difficult, and we just want to make sure that it's done right. And we want to make sure that voters can go and that there's no depression of the vote as a result of things not happening. Oh, actually, is there anyone here to testify on the prior two dockets on moving of the preliminary election or on early vote, either in person or virtually, before we move on? Yeah. Ed, you can come down and you can give testimony. Apologies. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, before we move on, this is public testimony on the dockets on early vote and on, okay, we are going to start, and Ed, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, councilors, esteemed colleagues, and fellow Bostonians. My name is Edwin Shoemaker. I am proud to stand before you today as someone who has served this city as a commissioner on the Board of Elections and now works as Executive Director of Voter Choice Massachusetts. Today, I will address three critical areas: defending the Boston Elections Department, supporting the proposed measures, and addressing misguided criticisms linking ballot shortages to RCV, ranked choice voting. But I'll leave that to my second testimony. Now I'm just going to be speaking on the two dockets at hand. With regard to docket 1507, in-person early voting is not just a convenience, it's a cornerstone. It's a cornerstone of our modern, accessible democracy. Boston voters clearly want early voting opportunities, as evidenced by the record-breaking turnout during recent elections. Early voting alleviates congestion on Election Day and ensures that working parents, elderly residents, and those with disabilities have ample opportunity to participate fully in our democratic process. With regard to docket 1508, setting the preliminary date for the 2025 preliminary election at September 9th, 2025, allows for timely planning, ensures sufficient preparation for what is expected to be a robust election season. This proactive measure provides clarity to voters and enables election officials to execute their duties with precision. And I'll save my other comments on this docket, the next docket, for later. Thank you.
Thank
all.
you. Is there anyone else here for public testimony on this docket? Okay, great. I will now start the timer and give myself 6 minutes on my questions. Okay, so my first question, and I just, I think I stated them in the beginning. There were a number of precincts that we found, according to reports, at least 14 Boston precincts in Hyde Park, 2 in Hyde Park, 1 in Rosendale, 1 in Jamaica Plain, 1 in West Roxbury, 1 in the South End, 3 in Dorchester, and 1 in Charlestown. Has your office done a comprehensive list to determine whether, what were the polling locations that had ballot shortage issues and the number and the locations? And if you have that, could you read that into the record?
We have done that analysis, however, we did not come prepared with that list. We can share it following this hearing.
Okay, through the chair, if that's information that you could please send to me so that I can share it with the body. What formula or data was used to predict ballot needs at each precinct, and why did it fail to account for the higher turnout?
Sure. So we had some discussions prior to the election, and we discussed that an 80% turnout would be sufficient for this election. Of course, that wasn't the case. In some precincts, they voted a little bit higher than 80%. But in regards to the formula, we used the return ballots that we received from early voting to subtract from our total registered voters, but then subtracted that twice, unfortunately. So there was an error in subtracting in formulas that we had created, but in the future, it'll be 100% of all registered voters will receive ballots at every precinct.
So it was a numeric formula
That's correct.
internally that you've determined led to the ballot distribution issue, because we know that there were, what we heard from the Secretary of State's office is that there were sufficient ballots, but it was a distribution issue. And the reason for that ballot distribution issue is because of a formula that was incorrect. Okay, thank you. Can you explain that again, Sabino, what that formula was, just so that everyone is aware?
Yeah, so we just came up with a formula saying 80% turnout, but we subtracted the amount of returned early vote and absentee ballots that we received that were already voted from in person or through the mail. But unfortunately, we double subtracted that in conjunction with the space that we had in the boxes that delivered the ballots caused some of the shortages. So unfortunately, it's not something that's going to happen in the future.
Thank you. So if it wasn't for that double subtraction, you're saying most precincts, most polling locations would have had
Plenty.
more than enough ballots, but for this human error that you're
Yes,
saying
my
of a
error.
formula.
My error. I'll take full responsibility for it.
Thank you, Sabino. Can you respond to the communication issues, either the Commissioner or Sabino? Why were precincts unable to reach City Hall when they encountered ballot shortages? And what protocols exist to ensure timely response to such emergencies?
I will say the election department received a high volume of calls on election day. We received over 15,000 calls. And we experienced a large number of machine breakdown issues. So the machine breakdown issues coupled with the ballot issues just caused a large influx of calls on election day, which led to the call issues.
What is the normal line of communication between a polling location and is there a communication tree, or is there someone who they're supposed to call? Do polling locations in Ward 18 call this person and in Ward 20, or do they just call the elections department the way that a voter would?
So for election day, we set up a phone bank with additional phone lines, and we train our poll workers based on whatever issue it is that they're experienced. They dial into a specific number. So if they're experiencing an issue with a voter, if it's a voter lookup, they would call one line. If it's a machine breakdown issue or a ballot issue, they would call a separate line. If it's an issue regarding staffing with the poll workers, they would call a separate line on election day. We recruit a number of volunteers across City Hall to staff our phone bank on election day.
Who are volunteers from City Hall, but not the poll workers themselves? Because I
Not
know
the
we
poll
were,
workers themselves. So
I
in
know that we
addition-
have recruitment issues even with poll workers, and a number of colleagues were insistent on getting more poll workers, but you're talking about a separate issue about people manning these phones.
So we did have, I think, about 54 additional volunteers covering our phone bank throughout the day on election day. But unfortunately, again, the two issues combined just increased the call volumes on election day.
Okay, thank you. How were decisions made about which precincts received emergency ballot deliveries first? Were there geographic or demographic considerations? And I want to shout out again to the Boston Police Department. We had that great, we have, the photo and video of Superintendent Basson and others delivering ballots. But we know that these issues affected, honestly, everyone in the city, but especially for communities and voters of color where there are already, barriers to voting. It's even more of an issue when there's anything that works to depress the voter turnout. So how were decisions made about how to allocate those emergency ballots?
They were based on the feedback that we received directly from the polling locations, and I think at some point we ended up calling into the polling locations. So rather than them calling us, I think at some point we called them, but that was later in the day. I think the first priority was whatever precincts we heard from that actually reported a ballot shortage.
Okay, thank you. That's my time, and so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Councilor Pepin, for his questions in 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you so much, Sabino, for giving that answer on the equation and how that was the main culprit of why this all happened. And I wanted to, before I dive really into my question, I do want to give a shout out to Marisol Santiago, who I believe is in the audience, for her work with Mass Vote. I know that I spoke to Marisol the day of the election, how we were both on the ground at multiple locations, and where they're trying to make sure that voters are not leaving the line. So shout out to you. My first question is that formula a human formula or is that a computer formula? Is that something that is based off, how could we fix that to make sure that doesn't happen next time around?
100% ballots will be delivered to every precinct.
Okay. I mentioned in my opening statement that 3 different polling locations in my district were impacted, 2 of them in Hyde Park, 1 in Rosendale. I believe 1 of them were facing shortages as early as 2 p.m. How did you respond to polling locations that were having shortages that early in the day and had to wait until later in the evening to get the ballots?
I would say we started our ballot delivery
11:30. Charlestown.
at 11:30. Again, it's unfortunate that happened and they had to wait a long period of time to receive ballots. We did start, I would say, immediately when I became aware of ballot shortages, we immediately acted to try to get ballots out to the precincts. So it is unfortunate that they had to wait that length of time to receive ballots.
Okay. And one of my first ever jobs with the city was actually working for an election. And I remember working that day, and I remember that there were numerous faulty ballots. How do we account for faulty ballots to make sure that, yes, we may say 100% of the registered voters are getting a ballot, but how many more extra do we give to each precinct?
I think 100% should account for the extras as well. I think the highest turnout that the city has ever seen is probably about 68%, which was in 2020. So I think sending 100% of the ballots should give us enough of a cushion.
Okay. And if someone, I think one of my colleagues actually formerly, if someone decided to vote, someone registered to vote early but decided to just vote the day of, do they have a ballot at the polling location?
Yes, as long as you have not returned your ballot, you can cast a ballot on election day.
Okay.
So I believe the formula that was used doesn't account for ballots that were requested. It counts for, it was accounting for ballots that were actually returned.
Okay, okay. All right, I think that Madam President asked a lot of the questions that I had, and I think that we got some of the answers that we wanted, but I just do want to, just to the residents of District 5 that I know were out there for a while, just thank you for waiting, and I'm glad that they were able to vote eventually. I did see a police officer from A1 drop off ballots at the Roosevelt School in Hyde Park. So I literally, with my own eyes, and very thankful to see that in action. So I'm glad that that was able to happen. And I do also want to echo something that Councilor Durkin said, and it's same-day voter registration. I think that that is very important. I mean, we all have different levels of civic engagement, and I think that on election day, a lot of people get inspired, and they may not be registered to vote. So I think that that's a step that the city of Boston needs to take forward to make it happen. But with that, honestly, that's it for my questions, and I will be stepping out of the hearing now just to attend to some family matters. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Councilor Pepin, for being here, and I really do appreciate it. I know that, I hope all is well with your family, so thank you. And I also want to echo this too comment of my colleague, Councilor Pepin and Councilor Durkin. There are more than 23 states that have same-day voter registration, and it increases voter access. It increases people's ability and willingness to engage in the democratic process. But so just want to put my stamp on that. So thank you, Councilor Pepin. The chair recognizes Councilor Murphy. You have the floor in 6 minutes.
How many precincts ran out of ballots, and do we know the exact number of how many machines broke down at some point during the day?
Don't quote me on this, we'll get the exact number after, but it was about 14 precincts that ran out of ballots. And we don't have the number of machines that broke down, but some of the machine issues were purely jams. So due to the 2-page ballots, voters were not waiting the 45 seconds that it takes to process the first page, and they were inserting the second page before the first had been processed. So a lot of machines were getting jammed throughout the
I
day.
was at a few polling locations where I saw sometimes it's property management that comes out or someone from the election department. Are the poll workers trained to unjam the machine?
We do cover jams on machines on election day. However, sometimes it's just based on comfort level.
Of course, yeah. And the 2 ballots, I know, definitely added an extra layer of problems with the machine. Okay, do we have a number or some idea of how many people may not have voted because of these concerns that happened?
No, we don't have a report on that.
Okay. Were there any problems in the primary election?
No.
Okay. And can you explain why, and maybe, because you said no one was there on the final, but in the primary, Mike Firestone, and was he there the entire day in the election department from the mayor's office of policy, and then Adam Cedarbaum from Corporation Counsel was in the election department?
No. Firestone was not there the entire day. He was there at the end of the night looking at election results at the front counter, I believe.
Okay. And was he there in the final election?
No, he was
Was
not.
was Adam Cedarbaum there in the final?
He was there, yes. He was in and out, not for the entire day.
But he was in and out. And when we count the ballots early, like the mail-in and early, who has access to those results?
Those results cannot be released until after 8 p.m. on election day. So those results they have to be closed like a precinct. So after 8 p.m. on election day, we start closing out those precincts.
And when you say they can be shared, do they have to be shared with everyone at the same time, or can some people have access to those results before others?
So when we close the precinct, we print the results, and the results are available at our front counter.
But in the primary, only a few printed and taped them. And I was told it's because you needed to combine the count from the mail-in ballots that were not combined yet at the precinct level. So the printout from the machine would not have been the total turnout for that precinct?
So I'm not
Is that-
sure.
I think, I'm sorry.
So let me, So there's two separate processes we're talking about here. So we're talking about the precinct level results, which are printed by the poll worker at every single precinct. They are required to print those results and post the tape on the wall. And then we also have the results from the precincts that were processed during the central tabulation. Those results are not available at the precinct. Those results are here at City Hall. Those results cannot be closed and released until after 8 p.m. So here at City Hall, we follow the same process that they do at the precinct. We close out each precinct and we
But
print
those
the
results weren't released at 8 o'clock, because at 10:30, we still didn't have, I think it was 216 precincts did not share their early voting results yet.
The precincts can't share the results because they won't
No,
have
I
the
mean, the
results.
election department and was not updating the website. At that point at 10:30, I hope all our hardworking poll workers were home.
So there's a process for closing out each precinct, and for the September election, we did a test run to increase the number of ballots that we processed during central tabulation. Again, vote by mail, we're still getting adjusted to vote by mail. It was only officially implemented in 2022. We're still adjusting to vote by mail and in-person early voting being added to the election process. We have never processed, I think it was 215 precincts. And the reason we processed so many precincts during September was because we knew we would experience a higher turnout during November. We wanted to get a sense for how many ballots we could realistically process during November. So for September, we changed the check-in process for central tabulation. We used an electronic check-in process, which helped us process more ballots, and we processed a
And
record
nobody
number.
knew those results? Did even you know the results?
We did not know the results.
Nobody knew the results.
So for 215 precincts, it took a little over a minute. So starting after 8 p.m., it took a little over a minute to close out each precinct before we could print out the actual results, which is why the results were...
Because at 10:30, there was still over 200 not closed out.
Not over 200, not
That's what I was
closed out.
told, that over 215 precincts still weren't closed, and that was at 10:30. I don't know, did you want to add anything,
No, do you
Sabina?
want to... Yeah.
No, I'm confused at 10:30, 215 precincts not closed
Well,
out.
you had told me that the reason why the results weren't being updated and people weren't sharing, which we know, a lot of people either send a picture or share the printout that goes on the wall, is because we were still counting and we didn't know the results yet because we were tabulating. and
I think what you're referencing is, once we close out each one of the central tab precincts, they have to be combined with the machine that gets returned from each precinct from the police officer.
Right.
We have to take that memory card, the results from the central tab. Once we have those two precincts, that's when we started releasing. We did not finish closing our central tab precincts till roughly 10:30. And then we started doing the combination of all of those other
I
releasing
thought you
of
said, though, you
results.
started at 8, so we didn't start until 10:30 when the actual,
No, we started closing them, but to close out 215 precincts takes roughly 1 minute per. They were all located on one device. So we can't do anything else with that device
Until
that's
each one is
also
done.
tabulating the actual results that are being received from the precinct level itself. So we had to wait until this process was done before we can start merging the results from the precinct level and the central tab level. Does that help?
yep, I'll wait for my next one, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
The question I have is, you had an allocation of ballots that went to every precinct, and then the remaining ballots stayed at City Hall, is that right? Is that
Yes.
correct? Why would they, what purpose would it make to have the ballots at City Hall? And why not just have all the ballots at the precinct, so you definitely know you'll have enough ballots to ensure that everyone has the right to vote?
So again, and looking into this, there's a number of things that are going to be addressed and done differently. However, there's also a space capacity in our ballot boxes, which is why we didn't go for 100%. But I think moving forward, we will adjust some other things to ensure that we're sending 100% of the ballots in the ballot box in the morning.
Okay. There was 14, about 14 locations that had major significant challenges such as lack of ballots. Do we know if it's more than 14, or are we still trying to figure that out?
I think more than 14 probably ran low, but the ones that actually ran out were approximately 14. Again, I'll get the exact number for all of you.
The one issue that really bothered me the most when I went to Cathedral High School, and it was at 5 o'clock, I went with my wife, and it was very dark in there, and you couldn't see anything. And people coming home from work and elderly people were trying to vote, and they were voting with their with their cell phone flashlight, trying to read the ballot. That has nothing to do with the actual ballots. That's more of an infrastructure planning issue. Do we go around and physically look at the location where people vote and say, yes, people can get in here, elderly people can get in because it's ADA accessible? Do the lights work? Is there heat on? Do we factor in those issues? Those are issues that I'm also concerned about. Did we check the heat? Do we check the light? Do we check the bathrooms work? Do we factor that in?
Yes, we do factor those things in, and there's extensive planning and coordination that does take place before the election to ensure that every single polling location is checked for all those things. However, there are more things that we can do and put in place to engage some of our external partners and buildings that are not city-owned buildings to ensure that they are making sure that they're checking these things. We do have a license agreement between the City of Boston and all of our external partners. But again, moving forward, I think there's a little bit more that we can do to engage them.
But the Cathedral High School wasn't checked, because when I got there at 5 o'clock, it was very dark. Actually, some people, volunteers including, had to go back to their houses in the south end and get little portable lamps. And I also saw many people using their cell phone flashlight to read the ballot, especially seniors, persons with disabilities. It was very, very discouraging in having to read that. So did we miss that part of it, that we just didn't ask the Cathedral High School, do the lights work?
That is something that is clearly identified in our agreement with them. So again, I think there's just other things that need to be put in place to engage our external partners so that they also understand the importance of all of these things.
Yeah, but when you come a week or 2 weeks before the election, before the election actually takes place, you come back with a checklist. You would do a run-by of all the voting locations, and you say, well, this polling location, the bathrooms don't work. This polling location's the heat's out. This polling location, the lights are very dim. Maybe we need to add a few more light bulbs. Is that part of the process of establishing that we have an effective operation to conduct an election?
Yes, it is.
But that failed.
So again, we work closely with the facilities directors for all of these locations. And I just think that there's additional things that need to be put in place with our external partners and engaging them on a level that we do our city partners as well.
Why, and Sabina, why wasn't the poll workers and city election officials, the wardens, why were their calls, including the Secretary of State, why were their calls not even picked up?
I believe the commissioner touched upon that due to the other areas of the office that we were dealing with, caused people to be shifting around. So that's increased the phone calls that we were receiving and the amount of time that we spent on some of the phone calls in regards to voter lookup as well as machine breakdowns. We did everything in our powers to try to fix those machines with a phone call to the polling location.
Sabino, who at the mayor's office were you working with on election day to resolve these?
Nobody. Commissioner and I refer to.
But you don't check in with the chief of staff or the policy director or the legal counsel?
No. Legal counsel walks around the office to help and assist with phone calls, just like any other volunteer.
I called Michael Broll when I saw that the Cathedral High School didn't have any lights, and I asked Michael for assistance, and You know, that was at 5 o'clock. It was actually right at the start of daylight savings time, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Maybe it was the first or the second night of it. But no one from the mayor's office, Michael Firestone, wasn't around? He was around preliminary.
He was not around. There were members of the administration around, but that was only when we had the ballot issues and we were distributing ballots. And at that point, I think I had a good grasp on the operation side and actually packing ballots and getting them out, because I was the one directly involved with coordinating with the police department and making sure that we got the ballots out to the precincts.
Well, at 5 o'clock, I was the first one to notify the Secretary of State that we were having major problems with the ballots, and I talked to their legal counsel. I couldn't get anyone on the phone, and they told me that they were calling the election department, and they were actually calling the Boston police. It was really the Secretary of State's office that saved us. Yes, the Boston police did their job, and we're thankful for it, but it shouldn't take the Boston police to go from City Hall at 5:30 in the afternoon to out to West Roxbury in the middle of traffic at 5:30 in the afternoon. It could take an hour and a half. There was a woman from Savin Hill that Council Murphy knows. She has a special needs child, and she waited, and John knows, she waited several hours, and there were no ballots there, and she said at some point she has to go home to care for her family. That's why we're asking these difficult questions, because they deserve the right to cast their vote. They're taxpayers, they're residents, and they felt that we as a city, and we as a city council too, we got them down. I'll acknowledge that. This body, this city council, let people down. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. The chair recognizes Councilor Fitzgerald. Your time starts now with 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, before I get into my questions, Mr. Piemonte, a couple of times today you've accepted full responsibility for this. And I just want to say that as hard as that is a hard thing to do, and I recognize that, and you're an honorable man, and that was an honorable action for you to do, because in situations like this, when mistakes occur, it's easy to find someone to try and fall on the sword, and for you to step up and take full responsibility, I just want you to know that I really appreciate those actions, and I think it says a lot to your character. So thank you very much for that. That being said, I do want to focus on more of the voting locations. There are a couple issues. I know in the Savin Hill Apartments, the entrance to the voting location is around the back. It is sort of covered in brush and bush, and it feels a little bit like, am I going the right way? Am I supposed to be here, right, as you're trying to enter the voting location? So I just want to flag that one, and I think it leads more to Councilor Flynn's suggestions about working with, and Commissioner, you alluded to it as well, working with the outside folks, the operations of each location, in making sure that they're well lit, accessible, and signage is visible, alerting people where to go. Just had a couple of concerns around that, and I can send more examples that I've just run into, especially when I'm up where all of us go around, and I would imagine most of us hang our own signs on Election Day, and sometimes we're out there and we see these things as well. So as we do that, I'll continue to just let you guys know. But I think otherwise you guys have answered the question sort of on the technical side of how the issue occurred and what we've done to fix it. I'm glad to hear that there's proper protocols now in place so that it won't happen again. And, human error we're all at fault for it, so it can happen, and I just appreciate the way you guys have handled accepting that responsibility, so thank you very much. No further questions, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilor. We are now on to Councilor Braden. You have the floor and 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to go back to the voting machine issues. I think you've already answered the question, but I think, the fact that there was two forms, I've heard this as well, that people were in a hurry. They were trying to put two in at a time. Some voters were complaining that their vote wasn't a secret ballot, a secret vote, because you couldn't feed the ballot into the machine if you had it in the packet, that the way
Secrecy slate?
the cover. Yeah, so we had people complaining about that as well. So it's I think it was particularly, we had a lot of ballot questions, and I think it really did make things very difficult. and it blocked the machines up. Was that, how widespread was that occurrence, or was that, I think it was all over the place. Everybody was, everywhere. I've heard it happened everywhere, just. And then the other issue you mentioned about, the reason we didn't send out, one of the logistical challenges was the ballot boxes were full. So because you had two ballot forms, that took up twice as much room as a regular ballot on a regular election would be. So I think it was a confluence of many, many factors that made life so difficult for you. Going forward, do you think our polling machines are needing replacement, or where are we at with that? I know we had conversations about the age of your polling stations at a previous hearing, or polling machines, sorry.
So we acquired these machines in 2019, and since then there has been a newer model that's a little bit faster. Again, this process would require an RFP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then the other curiosity, I know people have been asking about who was there to help you, and in terms of the mayor, in terms of the mayor's office or whatever. How long? My understanding was that that the elections department used to be in days gone by. I think Sabina, you might know this. In a previous administration, maybe going back to when Walsh came in, Mayor Walsh came in, that he moved the elections and corporation council into his cabinet. Before that, it was a non-mayoral. It was outside of the mayor's cabinet. Was there any reason why that was done? Like, it seems odd.
I have no idea.
No idea. Oh,
Yeah.
well, we'll have to look back in the mist of time to figure that one out. All right, and then I just, I think the issue. The issue about the phone calls, I think it was, and like as I said, a friend of mine who was working at a poll said they knew that they were running out of ballots at around 2 o'clock, and they started making calls, and they couldn't get anybody to answer the phone. And I think a lot of the poll workers were new. It was some of the more seasoned poll workers looked at the boxes and said, we're not going to have enough ballots, we're going to run out, and they started calling. But I think, there's been a lot of new poll workers as well. Do you think it's great that we have new people working the polls? I think during COVID, a lot of the older folks decided that they needed to sort of step back and not work the polls anymore. Do you think in terms of the training, or is there more training or more support needed for people who are new as poll workers? Have you heard that, or it's just a question?
I think we're looking at every opportunity for improvement. However, I will say, with the old and the new poll workers, they did an amazing job on Election Day.
Yeah, absolutely.
They did do exactly what they were supposed to do in calling the election department as soon as they became aware of ballot shortages.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you to all of our poll workers. I think both old and new poll workers, they did exactly what they were supposed to do.
Yeah. I think that's all I have for questions, but I do want to say, I want to thank all the poll workers. I know it's a very, very long day. I know that some folks were getting home at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, long after the polls closed. So it was a long and arduous day, and given the political climate at the moment, it was very stressful for everyone. So I want to just express my thanks and gratitude for all the great work that you do in your office, and for all the folks who step up every election to work as poll workers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. I'm finally getting the hang of this. All right, reset. Councillor Weber, you have 6 minutes. The clock starts now. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, you may have answered some of these questions already, and I apologize, but I think I had 3 polling stations which had ballot shortages, toward the end of the night. Ward 20, Precinct 5 at Spring Street, Ward 20, Precinct 16 at the Kilmer Lower School and at 19.5, the Collins Apartments. And so one thing, I received a phone call late in the day. From the Collins Apartments, they said they were running very low on ballots and maybe even run out at that point, and they couldn't reach anybody. Can you just explain what was going on and why people couldn't get in touch with the elections department? You know, if that was, you know, and did that happen? And then, you know, what was going on?
Yes, I think there was just a large influx of calls and a large number of issues experienced on election days. So the issues caused a large number of ballots, which were the machine breakdowns combined with the ballot shortages. I think we were experiencing a high number of calls that day, which is why they were unable to get through.
Mm-hmm. And are they calling landline? I mean, I'm trying to remember the last time I got a busy signal, you know, or I guess it was going to voicemail and nobody was calling them back. Or was there an issue with the phone lines?
There was no issue with the phone lines. Again, I think it's just the high volume of calls that we experienced. We do provide them with a lot of phone numbers that they can call based on the issue that they're experiencing. So if everyone was calling into the same line for ballot issues and machine issues, then that would have caused the backlog with the traffic.
Okay, and do you have the capability of just emails, text messages? Is there any issue with like just the system? Do we have,
We are looking into technology that can just make improvements in the process overall.
okay. And then, so I guess you were talking about this idea of whether all the ballots should have been distributed beforehand. I mean, is that what other cities do? They distribute all the ballots, or do they? I mean, I could see reasons why you'd want to keep some at a central location. You know, if there's a flood somewhere, and then, you know, they've lost all the ballots, and we don't have any in reserve. Do you know how other cities deal with that issue?
I'm not sure about the practices of other cities. I know that the decision not to send 100% was just based on the capacity of the ballot boxes.
Okay, and then I had heard earlier in the morning in West Roxbury from someone who's saying, "Oh, it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. They're like, we're running low, and we put in a request." And then I saw that, you know, that person after the election, and his thought was, well, like, I was on top of it, so we were fine, you know, later in the day. Do you think that at the precincts they knew when to ask for more ballots, or are there any systems in place for the future so it's not if there is a problem, it's not a rush in the evening? Do you think there's any? This person thought, people just kind of sat on this too long before they reached out to the elections department. What do you think of that?
That is an area for improvement, so we are looking into a way to perhaps create a flag, so once the voters get down to a certain number, if they see a bright pink piece of paper, then they know they need to call the election department. So again, we are looking at every opportunity for improving this process.
Yeah, so is the pink piece of paper at the bottom of the stack, or is it in the middle?
It'll be kind of in the middle of the stack. When you
Yeah.
get to a certain number, then that's your cue to call the election department.
Okay. Are you going to request more are we going to request more ballots than we used to because of this?
I think we had the amount of ballots in our possession. Again, it was the calculation error that led to us not packing enough ballots. So I don't necessarily think that we need to request additional ballots. I think we just need to adjust our operation.
Okay. So that's all the questions I have. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Weber. Okay, we will now turn on to public testimony, I believe, and then I will go back to my colleagues if they have any additional questions. Okay. I know that we have someone on Zoom. We don't have anyone on Zoom at the moment. Okay. So I will now turn it over to Marisol Santiago. Thank you, Marisol, for being here and for all of your work on behalf of Mass Vote. You have the floor, and because I know folks have been waiting patiently, I'm going to make sure that I'll give folks 3 minutes for public testimony, and your time starts now. Thank you, Marisol.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Marisol Santiago, the Policy and Organizing Director with Mass Vote. For folks that might not know, Mass Vote is a nonpartisan organization and member of the Massachusetts Election Protection Program Steering Committee, a group of statewide civic and community-based organizations. We released an analysis on voting conditions in Massachusetts for the 2024 presidential election. The analysis, using data directly from the program's field and poll monitor volunteers, identified major barriers to voting, including the 10-day voter registration blackout period, disability and physical accessibility issues, tabulators that jammed or broke, and polling locations in Boston that ran out of ballots before polls closed. The program trained and deployed over 400 nonpartisan election protection volunteers at 140 unique polling locations in 30 different municipalities across 9 counties on Election Day. Voting access issues identified by our volunteers include over 156 voters who showed up to vote in person and who were otherwise eligible to vote but had not registered prior to the 10-day voter registration deadline. And this is why we are big advocates on same-day voter registration, because that would help to solve that. Over 50 incidents of disability voting and other physical accessibility issues ranging from broken automark machines, limited handicap parking spaces, lack of handicap ramps, and a lack of automatic doors and/or doors that weren't propped open. 14 ballot tabulation machines that jammed or broke. Significant shortages of ballots in multiple Boston polling places the afternoon of Election Day. And in response to the myriad barriers to voting identified by our program, again, we recommend that the Massachusetts State Legislature work to immediately adopt same-day voter registration that would allow voters to register and update their registration on the same day that they vote. Everyone has a right to cast a ballot, but with an arbitrary registration cutoff period, polling locations without required accessibility oversight, and polling places running out of ballots, that circuit right is taking away from thousands of voters. It's one more reason why it's time we join, as Councilor Lujan said, the 23 other states with same-day voter registration. Mass Vote believes in protecting the integrity of elections and the tenets of democracy that remove barriers to voter participation. And we too want to uplift that when we work together to protect the integrity of elections, we do good work together. And we've seen some of the results of that in neighborhood precincts where wardens and volunteers have developed good relationships over time and a welcoming, supportive environment that makes voters enthusiastic to participate in the democratic process. Good collaboration improves voter engagement, local grassroots organizations, and builds community leadership to help disseminate voter information, such as ways to vote, deadlines, trainings, and overall ballot education. Finally, our election protection operations was over again to train and mobilize 400 nonpartisan volunteers, manage a staffed nonpartisan lawyer hotline, experienced in electoral law, and hopefully improve communications around some of the calls and the concerns that we were getting. Just to honor my time, I will say that I was personally placed at the polling location in Hyde Park. I arrived there somewhere around 4:45, didn't leave till the last ballot was cast at 9:09 p.m. And we are grateful that multiple efforts, including some of the council members, that there was communication happening to make sure that those problems were identified and resolved. And Mass Vote just wants to continue to work together, both with the City of Boston and also with other agencies that are responsible for protecting the integrity of our elections, because we know that when we do good work happens, and that this can continue to be improved now that we have early vote, and also like other ways to vote just besides in-person Election Day. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Marisol, and thank you for all that you do to enhance democracy here in our city. I have on this sign-in sheet, I know, Ed, you wanted to also, so I'll call you down to testify on this portion. And then if there's anyone else who is here for public testimony, I don't know if there's anyone else who's here for public testimony. Okay, so then Ed, and then we'll go back to my colleagues with, if they have any final questions.
As someone who has worked shoulder to shoulder with the women and men of the Boston Elections Department, I must address the unwarranted and unfair criticism that have been lobbed at them in the recent weeks. Let me be clear, the ballot shortages during the 2024 election were a logistical miscalculation, not a reflection of incompetence or systemic failure. The department is already taking steps necessary to ensure such issues do not occur, including adopting a data-driven planning model of improving communication channels with polling locations. Given their tireless commitment to maintaining the integrity of Boston's democratic process under challenging circumstances, it is unjust and disappointing to question the competence of Commissioner Neda Tavares, Registrar Sabino Pamonte, and Commissioner Ellen Rooney and their dedicated team. To speak on the docket, the order for the hearing regarding voter accessibility and election preparedness is a vital step towards ensuring equitable participation for all Bostonians. Expanding language access, improving polling site infrastructure, and leveraging technology to provide real-time updates are essential instruments in voter outreach and accessibility. Addressing the unfounded claims attempting to connect the recent ballot shortages to the feasibility of implementing ranked choice voting in Boston is essential. These arguments represent a fundamental misunderstanding of our logistical challenges on Election Day. Suggesting that RCV exacerbates such challenges not only misleads the public, but also undermines the efforts of election officials working to address these operational issues. Conflating logistical missteps with a proposed voting reform is a clear case of false equivalence, a rhetorical strategy that detracts from meaningful dialogue in improving our election systems. RCV often simplifies elections by eliminating costly low turnout preliminaries. Complexity or voter confusion concerns are unfounded, as proper education and modern technology can ensure seamless transition. Critics' claims rely on fear-mongering and misdirection rather than evidence. Let us separate the ballot shortage from the RCV debate and focus on actionable solutions that empower voters. Boston can address logistical issues while embracing reforms that create a fair, more representative electoral process. Councilors, Boston is at a crossroads. We can allow temporary setbacks to overshadow our successes, or we can seize on this moment to build a stronger, more inclusive electoral system that reflects our city's values. By supporting these measures, Boston can reaffirm its position as a leader in democratic innovation and inclusivity. Today, let us honor a collective commitment to democracy by supporting these measures and standing behind the dedicated professionals who ensure every Bostonian's voice is heard. Together, we can build a stronger, more inclusive electoral system for our city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ed. And just one more time, is anyone here for public testimony? If so, we just, okay. All right, well, thank you, Ed, and thank you for all that you're doing on behalf of Ranked Choice Voting Boston and for your efforts. I am now going to go back to my colleagues to see if they have any additional questions. If you have additional questions, please put your light on, and I will make sure that I continue. So. Okay. Well, I plan to give all of my colleagues 4 minutes, but this is going to be a 3-minute timer, and I'll let you go for a little bit longer. Okay, thank you. Councilor Murphy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just want to put a few things out there. Mike Firestone, Adam Cedarbaum were both requested to attend as panelists. I'm not sure if you're aware that they did not come, so some of my questions were, I had hoped to ask them directly, so thank you for answering them. I know it would have been better answers if they had been here to answer directly. Also, just want to get on the record, Election Day was November 5th. I was hearing from constituents starting early in the morning. You did pick up my call when I called you, Sabino, about that issue early in the morning. But at the next day at our council meeting, there were 3 of us who filed emergency late files, right? A procedure where myself, Councilor Lujan, and Councilor Pepin And none of us knew we were each filing them. That's why we combined them into one hearing order. So many of us, if not all of us on the council, really did want to get answers for our constituents. So I don't want to have this belief or understanding that, we're just calling you in here to be mean to you or, not respect you. I don't really know you personally, Commissioner, but I have formed a relationship in the 3 years I've been here, and you're a wonderful person, and I always respect your, availability for me when I have election questions, but, you have to be the adult in the room, and we have to ask the questions that our constituents are asking, so I did want to put that out there. And one thing that would be helpful to me, and maybe others, because I've gotten this question, I've tried to answer it as well as I can, but if you could help explain what the difference between, I know you're the commissioner, and not every department in the city of Boston, we have an election commission, we have boards, some departments are quasi-city departments. If you could explain the difference between what your position is and what your position is in the election department, please.
I am the chair of the Board of Election Commissioners. I am the one that initiates all of our board meetings and hearings and puts forward all of our plans for in-person early voting, such as the schedules, election day schedules, such as the one that was before you guys today, overseeing the operations and making sure that every piece is running, and that
Are you
the staff-
full-time?
Yes, I am
And are
full-time.
you here full-time in City
I am
Hall?
here full-time at City Hall. Yes, I am here full-time. And Sabina, I'll let you take hold.
You missed one thing. You are also the department head as well.
I am also the
Right,
department
that's
head.
what I wanted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm the
Okay.
department head as well as the chair of the Board of Election Commissioners.
Okay.
And I report to the commissioner, as well as her being the department head. We work very closely in getting all of our tasks together to get elections, city census, poll worker recruitment, anything that we do in our office, we work really close together to get everything done.
And does your hardworking staff down in the basement there, do they report to both of you or to you, Sabino?
Combination of both.
Combination.
They'll answer to whatever the commissioner
Okay, so you
ha-
both
asks
work
for.
together one year? Okay.
I
That's
just want
all.
to add
Go
one
ahead.
other thing. Our staff works very hard, so even though they might have a job title,
They do lots
they
of
do
things.
multiple functions.
I've
So if
seen
their
that.
job title is absentee director, when it comes time to doing data entry for nomination papers, they're doing nomination papers. They don't have one function, and that's everybody in our office, between the top all the way down to the bottom. They all work hard, and I want to just make sure that they're
Called over. No,
That's
I've seen them.
acknowledged.
Thank you. No, I've seen them work hard. You've touched on some plans that you've already reflected on, and things like you mentioned, maybe 100% of the ballots will be delivered. So could you share some of the changes you've already made decisions on going forward? Because it seems like, the conversations obviously have already started, and is this conversations you're having just among yourselves or with other entities?
With other entities, there will be a report issued to the Secretary of State on some of our findings, and there will be more immediate goals, medium-term goals, and other long-term goals as well.
And just a reminder, especially as we shift to, mail-in ballot voting and lots of changes, the elections nowadays don't look the same as probably when you started, Sabina, right? So making sure that we advocate for the proper funding and staffing in your department, that's the other, role we have on the council. We don't have much power, but we do have the ability to advocate and try to make sure each department does have the proper funding to do the job. And if we're expecting you to do things differently, or if things are going to change, then definitely make sure that you reach out and advocate for that. But thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilor Flynn. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you.
And 4 minutes.
Thank you. Sabino, you answer to the mayor's cabinet. The election department is under the mayor's cabinet. Is that accurate to say?
Yes.
And who's the secretary, or who's the senior person at the mayor's cabinet? Do you know who that point of contact is?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but we do fall under the, we fall under the law department.
Okay, so Adam Cedarbaum is ultimately responsible, I should say, right?
For our department?
Yes.
Yes.
Councilor Murphy, you mentioned that Adam was invited. Do you know why, Councilor Murphy or Councilor Louis-Jean, why Adam didn't show up? I do think it's a bit unfair for us to ask difficult questions to the commissioner and to Sabino, and not giving Adam an opportunity to be here too. But do either of you have an idea why he wasn't here?
So 2 days ago, we sent a request. We received a request from Councilor Murphy to have him here, and we submitted that request to him when it was received. And he has a conflict. It was short notice.
Maybe we might also have to have another follow-up hearing to get Adam here and ask him some questions. I don't want to see the election commissioner, Commissioner Tavares and Sabino, take the fall for election day operations. I think that would be unfair. I think they have earned the opportunity to continue to provide the best leadership they can. Certainly, we have major challenges, and I think it is appropriate for us to follow up this meeting and have another meeting with the senior person, which is Adam. Sabino, 2004, the election department was placed in receivership under the Secretary of State's office. Is that accurate?
2006.
2000. Why was it placed under receivership?
I wasn't in a position to make any decisions back then, but I believe it was also some inquiries about ballot shortages.
Okay. Similar to what we're going through right now, we are saying here today that we're going to make sure this never happens again. But not us in this room, but we also made that collective argument in 2006 that if this will never happen again, we would make the steps necessary to ensure that the next election or various elections that take place operate effectively. That's not the case. So we can't just come here and say, let's work together and the next election is going to be operating effectively. We tried that. I am advocating for the election department to be placed in receivership to provide the necessary leadership, administrative support to both of you. I think both of you can continue the work that you're doing with your team, but I do think there should be an overseer. I'm not sure if Adam is going to play that role or not, but I do think both of you should have the opportunity to continue to provide leadership. I also want to highlight that early same-day registration. I don't think we're capable of doing that. I think we have enough challenges as it is to have people come walking into a voting place, sign up to vote, and to register to vote, and to vote. I think our workers are overworked, and that puts an unfair burden on them. I think ranked choice voting, I don't think we can go forward with that after this recent election as well. I know it's politically incorrect to say that, and I bet you 70% of the people support ranked choice voting, but is it fair to the election department, to the rank and file workers to try to figure out ranked choice voting on election night? Are we confident that they're able to do it? No, the answer is no, we're not able to do that. Maybe after several elections where we demonstrate that we are professional and committed to fair elections, open elections, maybe it's a different argument. But at this time, I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, no, that can't happen. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Braden, do you have any? If not, it's fine.
Just one.
Okay.
One more question. I know you have the election advisory committee. Is that still? How often does that meet, and what's their role in advising around things like this?
We do still have an election advisory committee. We try to meet 4 times a year, and they are kind of our ears on the ground. They provide a lot of feedback from what they're hearing in the community. I usually, I'll run our plan for the upcoming election by them as well, just to get feedback on some of the things that we are putting in place.
And how many members does the committee have?
Oh, geez. There's a number of them.
It varies.
There's,
Depends
there's
what-
more than, there's probably more than 10 members, and
Yeah.
I know mass voter table.
Yeah.
CPA.
CPA is on there.
Yeah.
We try to engage folks from different neighborhoods. We have a representative from, was it Pastor Florissant?
Pastor Kiki.
So we just try to,
Rachel Cobb.
yeah, Rachel Cobb, Professor Cobb from Suffolk University. So there's a number of folks on there that we try to.
And they're able to give you valuable feedback on how,
Yes.
what they hear out in the communities and
Yeah.
let you know what's going down. Very good. Okay, I think that's all I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do any of my colleagues have any additional questions? No? Okay. I believe there is one more person for public testimony. Before I dismiss this panel, I just want to say thank you for all of your work. I know that it's hard work, but I also know that you care deeply about elections and about getting it right. So to hear that, Sabino, about the human error and about the twice subtraction, for someone who I know you are just so meticulous, we've all been there. We've all made mistakes. And so I hope no one is beating themselves up too hard about it. I do want to state for the record that the Secretary of State's office was invited, but because of the ongoing investigation, they declined to appear. And I also want to note the last time we actually had you both here was for ranked choice voting, the homo petition, in which you talked about the machines and and how there are going to be a need for new machines anyway. And I think it's the work of this body to be able to support democracy and to be able to support the work that you're doing, the need for new machines, and the discussions that we had here about how methods to really increase democratic participation, to increase what it looks like to make sure voters are elected, the people who are elected are a reflection of the majority will, which is a lot of what ranked choice voting is about, a consensus building. I really appreciated that hearing and your testimony at that hearing, because it showed what was possible when we worked together, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for being here. I know that we're going to continue to have ongoing discussions, and when the Secretary of State finalizes its investigation and its report, we'll probably have more to discuss and talk about. But thank you for being here. We only have one person on, I believe, one person for public testimony. We'll hear that person, and then we will adjourn. So thank you, Michelle. If you could please, if you could please state your name and your neighborhood and your affiliation. Oh, Jonathan. Okay.
Yes.
You have the.
Hi, Jonathan Cohn from the South End, the policy director at Progressive Mass. Folks know me from many different political hats as well. Wanted to thank you for taking time on this Friday to talk about important issues regarding elections. Probably not how people love spending their Fridays, so I wanted to make sure I express appreciation on that front. I want to talk particularly about the order regarding early voting. Having in-person early voting is critical for expanding accessibility, managing the wait times, helping ensure that people have a positive voting experience, because we know that creating positive voter experiences help people become lifelong voters. Wanted to note a few quick things about the order. One, the order on early voting talks about how the voting locations can be updated up to 48 hours in advance, and I would urge you to make sure that there is a much longer lead time in any voting locations that get chosen, knowing the fact that people plan much longer than just on a 48-hour basis. The city sends out helpful mailers listing the locations for early voting, and any of that work about educating voters about how and when to vote isn't something that easily turns on a 48-hour basis. So having that longer runway, it's stuff that really needs to be set in place weeks before early voting starts. I would also urge you, as thinking about what sites to use for early voting, to think about places that are already often used as high voting locations to begin with. That we have throughout the city a number of polling locations that are hubs for a number of precincts nearby. So there are already places that people in those surrounding neighborhoods are used to voting, and getting people into the patterns that they're used to, but on other days what some of the best ways to make sure people take advantage of in-person early voting and help to manage the voting process. Locations like East Boston High School, which serves precincts 6 to 10 in Ward 1, Cathedral High School, close to me, which serves several precincts in both Ward 3 and 8, the Frederick Middle School, which serves a number of precincts in Dorchester and Roxbury, the Jackson Man, and kind of that serves a number of precincts in Austin Brighton, and Boston Green Academy, that also kind of in Austin Brighton, serving a number of precincts. Those areas, a number of people are used to voting for. It helps also increase the visible presence of an election. As you think about what places to hold, think about how to site early voting in places where people will be passing by a location. It's why the BPL near me is such a valuable site. People pass by it. It makes it so that you can see that you can vote here that day. You pass by it and then through everyday traffic. I also urge you to make sure that you have as many locations as possible, particularly in the neighborhoods, as opposed to just a reliance on City Hall, which only serves best those who live in neighborhoods nearby and people who work downtown. And try to make sure that for the most part, there is at least one location within a mile of voters throughout the city as a way of making sure that everybody can take advantage of it. So when I thank you for this, and before going, just wanted to quickly push back against one thing that recently said. Our city can definitely handle election day registration or ranked choice voting. I know so many poll workers. They're intelligent, they're hardworking, they're committed people. Many of them want to be able to register voters on election day and find it disappointing whenever somebody comes to vote thinking that they're registered and they have to turn those voters away. That New Hampshire has done that for a while. Maine has done that for a while. Maine does ranked choice voting. I don't think that our election workers are in any way inferior to the election workers in surrounding states, and think that they can do great things when we ask them to do great things. So I wanted to just put in that phrase for the hardworking people in elections, and then I will free you to your Friday. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for all you do for our city, and thank you for those remarks. No public testimony. I will now turn it over to my colleagues if they have any closing remarks, starting with Councilor Murphy.
No, just thank you for being here, and I look forward to hearing, what changes are going to be made and how I can be helpful and supportive. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Flynn.
I also want to thank the administration team that's here. I do think we have to have another follow-up hearing with the supervisors of the election department to get more information on exactly what went wrong and what leadership some of the leaders in the mayor's office were playing on this particular day. I think that's a critical part of this issue in making sure we're all accountable. And I found it very disturbing at the Cathedral High School when elderly people of color, seniors, were not giving a fair opportunity to vote because of the lack of lights in the auditorium, in the gymnasium. We talk about ensuring every person have the right to vote, access to the ballot, and that didn't happen. Cathedral High School is located between Villa Victoria and Cathedral Public Housing down the road from Castle Square development, one of the most diverse areas in the city of Boston. And we didn't provide the leadership necessary to ensure every vote was counted. As city councilors, I'm embarrassed about that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Braden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just want to thank you both for being here this afternoon on a Friday afternoon. I also want to, I know we've interacted over the many years, and I appreciate your professionalism and I appreciate your commitment to looking at what happened and fixing it. So thank you for your work, and pass our thanks also to your team down in the elections department. Elections are always stressful, and it's only part of the work that you do in the city. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. I again just want to echo my colleagues in thanking you for all of the incredible work that you do. I know for many of us, the first time I got to know you, Savino, was myself when I was coming in, figuring out how to make sense of the entire process. And you were there with a very I actually think Savino cannot make errors because of how helpful you were in the process to so many of us. But we are all human. And I know that there's more post-mortem work to be done. The Secretary of State's doing their own investigation, so perhaps there'll be more that comes out. But I also know that our democracy is a project, and that every day we build a more perfect union, and that every day we're working to build a voting environment where people are, I think it was Marisol said, how are we encouraging people to feel like that they want to participate in our democracy. Whenever there are ballot shortages, that doesn't encourage people. And so I know that you all will continue to try to make it work right. And I know that you all love this city. And I know that you love the work that you do and care deeply, deeply, deeply about democratic access, right? The right to vote is sacred, as John Lewis stated, and we are going to continue every day to make it more sacred because it's important to our residents. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to Central staff for being here. It's very rare that we have a Friday afternoon hearing, but we had it because this topic is incredibly important. So thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you to everyone who came for public testimony. This hearing on dockets number 1670, 1507, and 1508 is adjourned.